Let's open our word of prayer. Lord, thank you for this day. Pray that you'll bless our time together and help us to always remember that you are in control of everything and that nothing is happening that you were not aware of. Bless us today in Jesus' name, amen. So today we're going to talk about some things are ending. I did do a midweek this week, if you want to look that up on the YouTube channel. And just as a reminder, if I do a live update midweek, when you go to the YouTube channel now, it will say like home, videos, maybe shorts, and then you might have to click over on the right to get live to show up. And that's where the live videos show up now. It's a change that YouTube made after doing things the same way for well over a decade. And I'm not so sure it wasn't to suppress people viewing live things, because people have trouble finding it. It's just a big change. So remember that. Also, I'm going to be doing a conference in Canada, May 5th and 6th. Last Days Bible Conference, ldbc.ca. And on that, I'm going to do 4 talks. I'm going to talk about the theme of the conference is from Psalm 90, about the end from the beginning. He never changed, the Lord God is in control. So we're going to do the first coming of Messiah, behold he came. The second coming of Messiah, behold he comes. The reign of Messiah in the millennium, behold he reigns. And then where? The city of Jerusalem, the city of God. And we'll be talking about the Temple Mount and all sorts of things like that. And then in June, I think the weekend of, June 10th, 11th, I'm going to be in Yorkshire, and I cannot remember the name of the church off the top of my head. You'll get advance notice of that. Just a small church. And then Moriel Conference up in the Scottish Highlands. That will be June 16 to 18. Pray for Jacob's health. By the way, he's still recovering from some surgeries and some health issues. And that one's going to be a conference about sort of building off the theme. When Jesus talked to his disciples, he said, the prophets long to see the day that you're seeing. And I think that's an attitude we need to have, that we should be longing, we should be grateful that we're seeing the day that we're seeing, even though it's very troubling. And there are some very troubling things I'm going to talk about today, because everything is in a pretty big state of turmoil. So we sit here, though, our lives are fairly normal, but things are falling apart. And that's why I said some things are ending. I don't know exactly which things are ending and how soon, but things are changing. And when this time comes for God's judgment to be poured out in different measures, sometimes before this last period of prophetic period begins, there'll be judgments, I think, that will come upon the earth. There's nothing to say that there can't be world war before that period of time begins. And certainly there are a lot of indications that we're in for some pretty rough sledding here for a while. So we talk about the convergence of events, acceleration, convergence, logistics, understanding, and we've referenced this verse quite a bit. Daniel chapter 12, verse 8, 9, and 10. Where he was told, seal up the book, Daniel, till the time of the end. And earlier in the chapter, he's told many will run to and fro and knowledge will increase. And the purpose of that was that people are going to be, there's twofold meaning to that, I think, that people will run to and fro and knowledge will increase. And notice it says knowledge, not wisdom, in that verse. And we have a lot of knowledge. I mean, you can go around here and you can see all the big server farms that are filled with people's information. And some of these companies exist just to collect data from you, and they're doing a pretty good job of it. But And I think that's one thing is people are going to be traveling and running back and forth, and knowledge will increase. But I think it also means that people will go back and forth through the book of Scripture. And it does say that knowledge, that knowledge will increase. And then in Daniel chapter 12, verses 8, 9, and 10, and it also references it in Daniel chapter 11, that the wise will understand and instruct many. So we really want to be part of those wise people that have wisdom, that understand. And I do think it's an indication that as we get closer to the end, things will become clearer. Some people may be ahead of others, but a lot of it's going to center around Jerusalem. So let's look at some of the things that happened this week. And I don't want to plow over things that I talked about before. I'll talk about judicial reform in Israel. By the way, this Nord Stream thing that happened, the destruction of the Nord Stream pipeline, I think last September, there's pretty good evidence that the U.S. did it. But now there's a new narrative coming out that, hey, we saw this yacht, and we think this yacht was filled with Ukrainians, and they were the ones who took out the Nord Stream. So, and I don't know why that narrative is coming up right now. I think part of it may be that it's designed to give people an out for backing off on support for Ukraine, but I'm not sure. I just really don't know. There were also a lot of missile strikes over the past couple of weeks across Ukraine. One of the things that was interesting is that Russia was using hypersonic missiles on a number of occasions. And one wonders why they were using the hypersonic missiles. Now, it could be that they were using the hypersonic missiles just to, in case you don't know, a hypersonic missile is a missile that flies at a multiple of the speed of sound, like at least 8 times the speed of sound. So speed of sound, let's say 600 miles per hour. So that means they're traveling 5,000 miles an hour or above. Some travel at Mach 13, which puts them at close to 10,000 miles per hour. There's really no missile system on the planet that can shoot down a hypersonic missile. The U.S. is developing them. I don't know how far along we are. They say we're getting close, but we'll see it. We'll believe it when we see it. But Russia has developed them. But the question is, why are they using them in Ukraine? Because one of the things you never really heard about in Ukraine thus far, Ukraine did have some jets. You haven't really heard anything about, Ukraine's using jets and that type of thing, or even ships. And that's where the hypersonic missile would be very effective, would be especially against ships. Some believe that one hypersonic missile could take out an aircraft carrier. And China also has hypersonic missiles, and I'll reference that a little bit down the road. I seem to be getting are you hearing a clicking? Okay, maybe it's just me. I'm hearing, what did you say? No. Let's see. Okay, well, let's talk about this first. This new large language model came out, and it's not called ChatGPT this time. It's called just GPT-4. It was released by OpenAI. Now, there's a lot of controversy about how much more powerful it is. It might be many millions of times more powerful in terms of what it looks at when it examines all the language and knowledge out there. So it's a significant jump. OpenAI, it's owned by Microsoft, and it's interesting, when Microsoft brought it out with OpenAI, they got rid of their ethics team that was watching over the ethics of use of these large language models, artificial intelligence, which is a little bit concerning. Why are they getting rid of the ethical team that's supposed to help rein this stuff in at the same time that they're rolling it out? And the answer is they probably really don't care that much. about the ethics part. So here's what OpenAI says. We've created GPT-4, the latest milestone in OpenAI's effort in scaling up deep learning. GPT-4 is a large multimodal model accepting image and text inputs, emitting text outputs that, while less capable than humans in many real-world scenarios, exhibits human-level performance on various professional and academic benchmarks. And I'll talk about that in a moment. And so when you look at the benchmarks that it's meeting, here's a chart that they came up with, and I'll show you the statistics a little bit, but the green is the blue is what GPT 3.5 could do. And that was just released not too long ago. Now they've come out with the next one, and you can see that almost across the board, this artificial intelligence thing is performing much better. And down here, you can see what they're doing, things like these advanced placement, things like the first one here is advanced placement calculus. And you can see that GPT-4 is really doing pretty well. It's scoring at the 40th percentile level. But you go across here, here's a little bit more of a better thing. For example, here is the uniform bar exam. See what GPT 3.5 on the right was performing at about the 10th percentile. Now it's performing at the 90th percentile. That's just in a few months. Now, there's a couple conclusions. I know what somebody's going to say is, well, it just shows you that it's really easy to replace lawyers. Because they're really not that bright, and we can get a machine to do it pretty quickly and cheaper, right? No billable rates and that type of thing. Here's one for SAT and advanced place, like SAT. Well, also, I should have pointed this out. The LSAT, the law school admission test, GPT 3.5 on the right was scoring in the 40th percentile, and now it's at the 88th percentile. And that's just, like I said, in a few months, it's doing that well. Here's SATs, went from 87th percentile to 93rd percentile. And you wonder, so people are going to wonder, like, well, why do we even take these tests anymore? I'll just send I'll get the AI to go take it for me. I'll just plug in the inputs and it'll give me the answers. And the answer is, it's doing pretty good, but look, some of these are pretty amazing. So a graduate record exam, if you went to graduate school, you take the graduate record exam. And by the way, I took both the LSAT and the graduate record exam. And I took the graduate record exam first because I was going to go to graduate school. I remember I took the one at Indiana State. I took the LSAT at Indiana State, but I took the one at Notre Dame, the graduate record exam. And the last section of my graduate record exam was exactly the same questions, same order, same number and everything. I remember some things like that. I can never remember where I put my car keys, but I can remember junk like that that's meaningless. But I had the exact same sections. And I'm not going to tell you how I did on the exam. I do remember I didn't do as well in the LSAT as I wanted, of course, but I remember I was interviewing with some large Chicago law firms, and I had done well enough that I got the interviews. And I remember this one really big law firm, and the first question the guy asked was, well, you got pretty good grades here, John, but what did you get on your LSAT? And I'm like, I've been in law school for 2 years. I ranked fairly high in my class. Why do you even want to know that? And I think I asked him that way. And of course, I didn't get a call back on that one. But look at this, like graduate record exam verbal, one up from the bottom of the yellow section. GPT 3.5 was 63rd percentile. Now it's 99th percentile. SAT, evidence-based reading and writing, the first one up there, 87th percentile to 93rd percentile. that's pretty amazing. This stuff it's going to be ubiquitous. Everybody says it's going to have a huge impact on the way humanity operates. In fact, here's an article from the National Interest a couple of weeks ago by Eric Mandel saying open source intelligence is indispensable for countering threats. And so what you're going to see is it's going to be used in defense industry, intelligence agencies, and that type of thing. And I don't know, it bothers me because I don't know where it's going to go. Here's another one. This is Foreign Affairs, which is talking about innovation power, how technology will reshape global geopolitics. Why technology will define the face of geopolitics. And so we know this thing is coming, that everything's becoming digital. Everybody's using it. The genie is out of the bottle. We're not going back to where they don't use it. And even when we have a case where a company is bringing it out, they fire their ethics people. I'm sorry, lay them off. And that's concerning. So I want to remember we're coming up on this digital currencies. We're going to replay. This is Augustus Carstens, who is a manager at the Bank for International Settlements, talking about central bank digital currencies. And this was done back in, I think, September, October of 2021.
Our analysis on CBDC, in particular for the use of general use, we tend to establish the equivalence with cash. And there is a huge difference there. For example, in cash, we don't know, for example, who's using a $100 bill today. We don't know who is using a 1,000 peso bill today. A key difference with the CBDC is that central bank will have absolute control on the rules and regulations that will determine the use of that expression of central bank liability. And also we will have the technology to enforce that. Those two issues are extremely important, and that makes a huge difference with respect to what cash is.
This is his bio page. He's general manager for the Bank for International Settlements. That's defined as the central bank for central banks. And you can see what he says is, we don't really like it because, people are spending money and we don't know what they're spending money for. And we want to be able to track that. And so this was an article at the Sociable talking about the Bank for International Settlements called for a public-private unified programmable ledger for CBDC, tokenized deposits, and payment systems. And there's a pretty sophisticated payment system that's being rolled out by U.S. banks and the Federal Reserve as we speak. When they're going to roll out central bank digital currencies, I don't know. It could be much sooner than we think, particularly if the whole system sort of crashes. Here's another guy from the International Monetary Fund talking at a conference recently, I think back in February, about central bank digital currencies and what they want to do.
The third way we think CBDC can improve financial inclusion is through what we call programmability. That is, CBDC can allow government agencies and private sector players to program, to create smart contracts, to allow targeted policy functions. For example, welfare payment. For example, consumption coupon. For example, food stamp. By programming CBDC, those money can be precisely targeted for what kind of people can own and what kind of use this money can be utilized. For example, for food. So this potential programmability can help government agencies to precisely target their support to those people who need support. So that way can also improve financial inclusion. Of course, I want to end with a caveat because CBDC is not a panacea. CBDC cannot solve every challenge in financial inclusion. There are some aspects of financial inclusion is not related to technology. For example, financial literacy, digital literacy. So CBDC has to work with other policies together to try to improve financial inclusion. I stop here.
But everything that we've seen, remember that G20 meeting in Indonesia where the Indonesian health minister got up and said, hey, we're going to put health records, and the next time we have something that needs intervention on a global scale, we'll be able to program all that into everything, and the currency and your digital passport and that sort of thing. And that's what they're coming. Now, the next article I got from Patrick Wood, Technocracy News. I would highly recommend that you follow him. He also has a paid section on Substack that you can follow. He also has a new book out about the twin pillars of, I forget what the title of it is. It talks about transhumanism and technocracy. And Patrick's very knowledgeable. He was here a few years ago, did a weekend conference for us. And I've known Patrick for a long time. So he's a very solid believer. But I think even he, for a while, thought that, well, maybe this stuff is a little bit further off in the future. But I heard him interviewed a few months ago, and he said, I think we're actually here. I think that this is the sort of the end of days scenario that people have been talking about. So he gave this article this week. Now, he did a book years ago called Trilaterals Over Washington. He's followed the Trilateral Commission and the Rockefeller Foundation and the people that have been involved with that. And then, of course, the things that flowed out of that, the Council on Foreign Relations, people like Zbigniew Brzezinski, he was a important person in the national security apparatus under the Carter administration. But so they have this big meeting, and they have rules at the meeting is you can kind of tell what people talk about, but you can't identify who said it. So here was one thing. This came from Nikkei Asia. Trilateral Commission calls 2023 the year one of the New World Order. By the way, I'm also doing 5 o'clock, 4:45 or 5 o'clock tomorrow. I'll be doing a live discussion with Tom Hughes at Hope for Our Times on his channel, 5 o'clock Eastern U.S. time. So you have this, so they, look at all of these things that this is this convergence of all of these things happening at the same time. I will confess to you, it's almost impossible to keep up. It really is. I mean, I sit here on Sunday morning, and I did a midweek this week, and it's just like, up until I do it, I'm like changing it, I'm putting things in, I'm adding things out, and it's like, oh, I forgot about that. I read that a day or two ago, and I forgot about it because there's a whole bunch more that's sort of filling the limited space in my head. But look at some quotes from this article. 3 decades of globalization. This is what the article says. Then some quotes here. This is a quote. 3 decades of globalization defined as integrated, free market-based, and deflationary has been replaced by what will be a multi-decade period of globalization defined as fragmented, not free market-based, but industrial policy-based and structurally inflationary. What's that mean? What you thought the world was like is over for decades. And I don't think that's an inaccurate statement. Then this person said this year, 2023, is year one of this new global order. Now, when we talk about these things in Bible prophecy, and we talk about coming new world order and that type of thing, a lot of people say, you people are crazy. There's not a global order coming. But then here's the Trilateral Commission people, and somebody says this, and there was no reporting that when she she or he said this, well, she, he, or they, I'm sorry, I forgot my inclusive pronouns. When she, he, or they said this, there was no reports that everybody was running out of the room screaming, oh no, oh no. Because it's the way it is now. At the core of this shift is the U.S. Instead of committing to a neoliberal free market economy, the U.S. government is driving the economy and key industries towards a set of objectives, such as domestic equity at home and competition with China, the speaker said. In such a world, middle powers like India, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey will carve their own paths, weighing, and it's interesting, the people they pick, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and you could say Iran, well, there's more people they'll talk about here in just a second, will carve their own paths, weighing the economic, strategic, and defense interests, the speaker said. Ironically, as the Trilateral Commission convened, Saudi Arabia and Iran agreed to normalize relations, shattering Israel's hopes for isolating Tehran. The deal was brokered by China, with the U.S. having no role in the handshake. But Commission members expressed hope that China would play a part in ending the Ukraine war. Whether Russia will stop the war depends on the role of China. If China decides to help Russia evade sanctions, if China decides to provide Russia with arms, this war can go on for very long. In the end, I don't know that that's accurate, because Russia has a lot more power, people, military hardware, and that type of thing to throw at this than Ukraine does. And I'm not sure that the EU and the United States have the industrial base anymore to continue to rearm Ukraine. So if China gets involved on the side of Russia, it's really pretty much over, I think. The question is how quickly and what's the end game look like. Here's some more. At least for the short term, some of these priorities seem to have shifted. We need to now reorder these priorities in a way that energy transformation happens and becomes the main driver of where investments need to go. Another hot topic at the Trilateral Commission meeting was artificial intelligence. A poll last year found that 49% of AI researchers have said that AI poses an existential threat to humanity. Remember the Ludowski video I played a couple weeks ago, where he was just talking, in his T-shirt that, the collar had been kind of pulled out, like he looked like the ad for the, hey, you need a new T-shirt thing. But he was saying is, there seems like there's almost demons involved in this. So what was our solution was we're summoning demons, so we put a demon summoning machine in everybody's living room, like an Alexa box. So they said AI poses an existential threat to humanity, almost to the level of a nuclear type of disaster in the scale of humanity, said a member. Many in the room called for a global regulatory scheme to govern AI, which works if the company doesn't lay everybody off that's doing the AI ethics thing. Still, participants were generally positive about the wildly popular ChatGPT, and later jokingly asked the bot to write a poem about the Trilateral Commission, following as one example. So here's what ChatGPT wrote as a poem about the Trilateral Commission. And I quote from the article. In secret meetings, you plan and conspire to create a new world, a new order of which you aspire. Your goals are unclear, but some see the end, as a world government with you as its friend. Okay, and we're the conspiracy theorists. So today we are going to grant the honorary prophecy updater to ChatGPT and the Trilateral Commission, who are finally on the same page with us. They just don't know why they're on the same page with us. Well, I'll talk about this now, because I have a whole bunch more on this, but it's kind of broken up. So while I'm thinking about it, this is interesting. So Saudis entered into this diplomatic arrangement They're going to open embassies in each other's countries between Saudi Arabia and Iran. China brokered it. U.S. had nothing to do with it. Well, I take it back. The U.S. probably had a lot to do with it because the Saudis, they're pragmatic and they're looking at things and they're saying, I think that the U.S. just isn't going to really help us out here. They've always said that they support Israel, but they had these arms stores that they had stored at Israel for maybe a future war in the Middle East, and they're shipping those all to Ukraine. So if we think, and then intelligence reports said it could take 12, 13 years for the U.S. to manufacture back what we've shipped to Ukraine. That's not really good news in a volatile world. I think we can all agree with that. But part of this, part of the reason why the Saudis wanted to do this is they've had a lot of trouble with Yemen. And Iran has armed the Houthi rebels in Yemen. Yemen's a fairly large country. I think it has 45 million people living in it, about the same number that lived in Ukraine before the war started. Ukraine's down to about 23 million now, maybe less. And so part of this was, okay, they're not going to arm the Houthis. And they've had attacks on oil refineries and other oil installations in Saudi Arabia. So Saudi Arabia wanted to get rid of that, so that's why they entered into this. They're pragmatic. Now, I think Saudi Arabia has a goal of being the most powerful military force in the Middle East. Right now, that belongs to Israel. But Israel's relatively small, 8 or 9 million people, like 1/5 of what they have in Yemen. And then you have all the other, you have, I don't know, what is it, 1 billion Muslims living in the Middle East around Israel. Saudi Arabia wants to step into that role, but they need space to develop that. And they also need partners. And so if they don't have to worry about Iran for a while, they can take some time to develop all the things that they want to do. But this is also an article from a blog called The Automatic Earth. Iran-Saudi rapprochement will deal a death blow to the dollar. So when you look at, and I'll talk a little bit about Silicon Valley Bank in a minute, you look at these things that are going on with the financial system, and it can be pretty troubling. But I think if things really collapse, the dollar can be destroyed by inflation, or the dollar can be destroyed by the banking system falling apart. And in which case, the result is sort of the same. The dollar's been destroyed. When the dollar goes down or hits into inflation, there are certain things that are going to become very valuable. I think precious metals will become valuable. But I know people who have been trying to go out and buy some of these lately, and they can't. They're being told, well, you might get something delivered to you in a few months. So it may be too late to get a large store of those. But other commodities will go up in value, particularly as this green energy nonsense starts to fall apart. People are going to rely on oil. Africa's not developed yet. They want oil. Other countries want to develop. They need oil and gas to do that. So the countries that have oil, the value of their stock is going to go up. Now, the U.S. has a lot, and the U.S. probably could produce a lot more for the short term if we had the right people in charge. If we had people in charge. I don't know who's in charge down there. So it's going to be a problem. Well, again, this is a little bit out of order, but I'll do this. So this in Megiddo Junction in north central Israel yesterday, they had a roadside bomb attack, and it could have been very, very serious, but they were able to neutralize the person who was in the car with this person and take care of this. But this was a pretty serious incident, and I'm still waiting to get some more details about it. But that just happened on a major road, highway, and everything that people drive on. The people that did this apparently came across the border from Lebanon, it appears, and then they were able to escape back across the border. That's concerning. So just pay attention to that. And the foreign ministry from Russia at the UN Security Council on Thursday said that, at the Security Council, the Russian ambassador was talking about the fact that we need to stop these Israeli attacks in Syria. These have to come to an end. And part of that was related, they think, to the fact that Israel sort of has weighed in on the side of Ukraine in the Russian-Ukraine war. So we'll have to watch and see how that comes about. Now, I need to find this article, so while I'm talking, I will do it. This relates to Chat GPT, GPT-4, and artificial intelligence. It's an article by Ezra Klein. And he's a man of the left. I referred to this in my midweek update because some people did not see this. I think that it's important. He wrote this about a week ago. It didn't appear in the paper, but it did appear in the this. So listen to some of the quotes from this article. In 2018, Sundar Pichai, the chief executive of Google, and not one of the tech executives known for overstatements, said, AI is probably the most important thing humanity has ever worked on. I think of it as something more profound than electricity or fire. Try to live for a few moments in the possibility that he's right, Ezra Klein says. There is no more profound human bias than the expectation that tomorrow will be like today. That's called the normalcy bias. We see things happening. It's very disconcerting. And so what we do is we have this default thing where we interpret things are going on. Well, it's just, I'm really not seeing what I'm seeing. I want to think that everything is just like it was. And we've been saying here for years that we're not going back to 2019. That's never happening, let alone going back to 1958. Now, it's possible we might go back to 400 AD when nobody had any electricity or anything. I can't do that. There's no more profound human bias than the expectation that tomorrow will be like today. It is a powerful heuristic tool because it is almost always correct. Tomorrow probably will be like today. Next year probably will be like this year. But cast your gaze 10 or 20 years out. Typically, that has been possible in human history. I don't think it is now. I said, this is a New York Times guy, but listen, this is solid, intelligent writing. Artificial intelligence is a loose term, and I mean it loosely. I am describing not the soul of intelligence, but the texture of a world populated by Chat GPT-like programs that free us as though they were intelligent and that shape or govern much of our lives. Such systems, to a large extent, already here, but what's coming will make them look like toys. What is hardest to appreciate in AI is the improvement curve. And so now you'll see articles where, like, Ray Kurzweil, who's been involved with the thing called the Singularity, and I think he works for Google now. He's worked for Google for some time. But back in 2045, Time came out with a very famous cover, and it said 2045. Remember, it had the picture of the back of a head, and it had wires, a couple big wires going into the base of the skull. And the title of the cover said 2045, the year man becomes immortal. And I think that was 2011 or 2012 that cover came out. We all used it in Bible prophecy. Okay, so here we are 11 or 12 years later, and the 2045 thing is probably not when it's going to happen. In fact, Kurzweil in a recent interview said the singularity, this immortality thing that we're trying to achieve, will happen in 7 years, 2030. Everybody's using 20. Just go do Google for 2030, Vision 2030, SDG 2030, and you'll come up with a pile of images about 2030. Now, I'm not date setting or anything like that. I want that to be very clear. I'm just saying is Everybody seems to be focused on 2030. Ukraine 2030, Saudi Arabia Vision 2030, Sustainable Development Goals of the UN 2030, on and on and on. Now the singularity guys, artificial guys, intelligent guys are coming out and saying, hey, we think we're going to get this done by 2030. So let me go down here. He talks about the early days of Charlie Vector. He lived out in the Bay Area. In a 2022 survey, AI experts were asked, what probability do you put on human inability to control future advanced AI systems causing human extinction or similarly permanent and severe disempowerment by the human species? The median reply was 10%. I find that hard to fathom, even though I have spoken to many who put probabilities even higher. Would you work on a technology you thought had a 10% chance of wiping out humanity? I mean, if you had a chance, when you got in your car and you had a 10% chance of having an accident, you probably wouldn't do it. If you got on the subway, well, subway in New York is probably not a good example because I'd have a 10% chance of being mugged in the subway in New York. But look, I used to go to New York a lot on business, and I took the subway all over the place. And people that lived there, I remember one of them had a conversation with Pam, where's your husband? Well, he took the subway down to the theater district to maybe catch a play. And she's like, he's out of his mind. That was 40 years ago, but it was when New York was in pretty bad shape. But I did the calculus in my head. The chance that somebody's going to, do something to me is pretty slim. So I'm going to take the risk. And I will tell you, I once had a guy lunge at me going down into a subway near Times Square, Radio City Music Hall. And it was a bit disconcerting. That was about 20 years ago. So there was a quote here that I want to see this. Could these systems usher in a new era of scientific progress? In 2021, a system built by DeepMind managed to predict the 3D structure of tens of thousands of proteins in advance so remarkable that the editors of the journal Science named it their breakthrough of the year. Will AI populate our world with non-human companions and personalities to become our friends and our enemies and our assistants and our gurus and perhaps even our lovers? Within 2 months of downloading Replica, Denise Valenciano, a 30-year-old woman in San Diego, left her boyfriend and is now happily retired from human relationships, the New York Magazine reports. And he also goes in here and he talks about the fact that we're really getting to the place where there seems to be demons behind this. And it's a bit disconcerting that it's almost like we're summoning demons. And this is a pretty common theme that people are doing, that the programmers, the coders in this are getting to where they're summoning demons. So understand that that's that. So I'm going to try to stay off of artificial intelligence the rest of the talk here today, but understand this is a really big deal. And when the guys at the Trilateral Commission say this is the year one of the New World Order, what if they're right? What if it turns out that they're right? So we're going to talk about this for just a little bit and go through some of these things. This is what prompted me to correct my insensitive, non-inclusive language and use of pronouns when I was referring to the identified person who spoke at the Trilateral Commission meeting. This is an article from the Financial Times in the last couple days. Donors snub Oxfam over its trans-inclusive language. So people contribute to this. I'm going to go through some pages. Try not to spend too much time on it because I could spend the rest of the time talking about what this is doing. And what they're doing is they put out an inclusive language guide. And they have these things, the power of language. Here's Oxfam's mission and vision as a global organization that fights inequality to end poverty and injustice. We offer life-saving support in times of crisis and advocate for economic justice, gender equality, and climate action. DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. We demand equal rights and equal treatment so that everyone can thrive, not just survive. The future is equal. And it goes on, you can see their thing here. It is important that language, these are the language police that we see everywhere now. They get this from, and they have this, it's a really slick publication that they put out. There'll be a link in the video description to it. The Inclusive Language Guide by Oxfam. At Oxfam, it is important that our language we use reflects our values and work. Language has the power to reinforce or deconstruct systems of power that maintain poverty, inequality, and suffering. Choices in language can empower us to reframe issues, rewrite tired stories, challenge problematic ideas, and build a radically better future based on survivor-centered, intersectional, anti-racist, and feminist vision of equality. I feel left out. I'm sorry. The role of language in tackling poverty. Oxfam's aim is to prevent and relieve poverty and suffering, and to promote human rights, equality, and diversity. We cannot end poverty unless we take a truly inclusive approach to tackling the root causes, the systems and structures that keep people in poverty, an intersectional approach. So this is Marxism. This is Marxism, LGBTQTIA plus minus, ampersand asterisk thing that they use. And then look at this, grassroots organization, activists, racial justice and decolonization, colonial history, meaningful decolonization of our work, and a shifting of power from the global minority to the majority. And it goes on to say that, so here's how you use this. We have this, there's a trigger warning. Some of you people are going to be upset by this, and you're going to think because you're blinded by your privilege. You think that your privilege came about because you worked hard. And I've said that. I've said, to me, privilege was, I got up and went into the office at 2 or 3 a.m. at time for many years in a row, actually. And I worked hard, as did a lot of other people. And the privilege was sitting in an office alone for 5 or 6 hours every day before the other people started, those slackers started rolling in at 8 o'clock in the morning, for crying out loud. But the point is, but they're saying, you think you have privilege. Social change by its very nature is disrupted. The comfort or status quo must be disrupted in order to dismantle oppressive structures and create pathways to equality. For example, many people don't personally associate with the concept of having privilege, nor recognize the relative advantages they may be afforded in society compared to others, particularly if they have themselves struggled or feel that they have earned that privilege. This is a section in it. Feminist principles for language use. Silence is violence. Inclusion and belonging. It goes on. Gender justice, sexual diversity, and women's rights. Oxfam's commitment is to gender justice at the heart of our work to overcome inequality. Gender justice is understood as full equality between women and men, including trans men and women, as well as non-binary people. Ignoring this from Mark 10, the Pharisees came to him and asked him, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife, testing him? And he answered and said to them, what did Moses command you? They said, Moses permitted a man to write a certificate of divorce and to dismiss her. And Jesus answered and said, because of the hardness of your heart, he wrote you this precept. But from the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. No inclusivist language there, just the facts, people. But they don't deal with that. So they go on, they have gender norms and inequality. Androcentrism is the practice, conscious or otherwise, of placing a masculine point of view at the center of one's worldview, culture, and history, thereby culturally marginalizing femininity. My wife does this all the time with me. You're thinking that way because you're a guy. And that's fine. Gender justice, human beings, humankind. We don't say mankind, but they say humankind. That's okay. You see how ridiculous this is? This is just, And they always have the little equality flags down here on these pages. Parenthood, we avoid mother or father, avoid assuming the adoption of gendered roles by transgender parents. Then over here under pronoun, we avoid assuming it is correct to describe someone as he or she based on we avoid he or she because assuming it is correct to describe someone as he or she based on their name or physical appearance. So in other words, you really can't know anything, okay? And that's why this is how they're affecting social changes. They keep you off. And then here's this, I don't even know how you say this. Wominx. Why? The term wominx is sometimes used to indicate that trans women are included in your definition of women. It is more commonly used in some countries than others. Yeah, you know what it is? It's only used in countries where you've been educated into being morons. That's when it's used. We've got to break down basic human understanding. I'm sure that if you went to, saw a study they did, they went to some tribes that really don't have a lot of contact with the rest of humanity. And what did they find? They found long-term marriages between a male and a female to work together. And these were non-Christian things. This is how they had organized their social structure. Whilst the majority of the time we use the spelling women, in some contexts it may be appropriate to use wominx, whatever that is, which can be seen as a mark of inclusion or solidarity. Or, I would add, comma, or a mark that you've really lost your mind. However, some trans people object to the phrase. So, and then again, here's the flags and everything. And they go through all these different things. And look at how they changed language here, though. Anti-abortion, anti-choice. The term pro-life is emotive and misleading. But pro-choice is okay instead of pro-abortion. Okay, you really couldn't say that, but pro-life is emotive and misleading. Anti-abortion is accurate and avoids negative connotations that cause discrimination against people that need or choose to have abortions. So we avoid pro-life. And this is making its way. This is the lieutenant governor, I think her name is Flanagan, of Minnesota this week.
Because let's be clear, this is life-affirming and life-saving healthcare. When our children tell us who they are, it is our job as grown-ups to listen and to believe them. That's what it means to be a good parent.
Okay, we just listened and believed them. Do you think her parents did that? Yeah, they believed everything. They told her, "You're great. You should get a trophy just for showing up." Remember that scene in one of the movies with Ben Stiller? Robert De Niro comes over to his parents' house. He's married to De Niro's daughter in the movie, and he's looking at what they call it, the wall of, what was the guy's name? Alvin, or whatever the guy's character's name, the wall of Alvin in his bedroom. And he picks up the trophy. He says, "I didn't know they gave trophies for 9th place." And Ben Stiller goes, "Oh yeah, they give them all the way down to 12. You know, and there was a perfect picture of society. Stephen Miller, who worked in the Trump administration as advisor in response to Lieutenant Governor Flanagan's comments here, said it is the duty of adults to protect children. Sacrificing their minds and bodies to the gender cult is vile abuse. Mass gender confusion is not coming from children, but from the twisted culture adults impose on them. We don't give diet pills and lap bands to anemic, anorexic girls." Well said. This was a federal judge. I don't know if you saw the videos of this. He went to Stanford University Law School, and he wrote this in the Wall Street. He was attacked mercilessly at the thing, and he actually said, "I just would like somebody from the administration to get up here." So the vice president of equity and inclusion, or whatever her ridiculous title is. I mean, I made it all the way through law school. We didn't have a diversity, equity, and inclusion vice president. You know, we had like a librarian, and we had a dean of students and that type of thing. But she gets up and she says, "Well, you're here to talk about some valuable things, but the way you ruled, you are causing massive hurt here, and I'm glad people are standing up against you." And the students went crazy. So if I was a federal judge, I would say, I want the names of everybody there, and if I get a resume from any one of them for a clerkship, it's going in the trash. Because they've been educated beyond, out of their intelligence that they might have had. I'll hire ChatGPT or GPT-4 before I hire these people. Here's what he said. Stanford Law School's website touts its collegial culture in which collaboration and the open exchange of ideas are essential to life and learning. Then where's the culture I experienced when I visited? Then there's the culture I experienced when I visited Stanford last week. I had been invited by the student chapter of the Federalist Society to discuss the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit, on which I've served since 2018. I've spoken at law schools across the country. That means he was appointed by you-know-who in 2018. One of my first clerks graduated from Stanford. I have friends on the faculty. I gave a talk there a few years ago, but not this time. When I arrived, the walls were festooned with posters denouncing me for crimes against women, gays, blacks, and trans people. Obviously, these students had studied the Oxfam or something like the Oxfam language inclusion guide or whatever it was. This didn't seem collegial. I could hear chanting 50 yards away, reminiscent of a tent revival in its intensity. And that's a very astute observation. This is a religion that's being foisted on people. It has its theology, it has its commandments, it has its deity. The deity usually is the self, but it is a religion that people are, so you can get that at the thing. So real quickly on, so this financial thing, I've got a clip I'm going to play with Ed Dowd on War Room Friday. But value of global bank stocks dropped $460 billion. There have been 3 banks that have failed. Silicon Valley Bank, Signature Bank, and then another one that begins with an S, and I can't remember the name of it. There was reports that came out that there's about 185 banks in similar condition. And so people are like, we got to stop. We can't have runs on the banks. We've got to stop that. And you can see there's the SVB Financial Group share price, bailing out small tech. This is the financial, look at some of these articles in the Financial Times. A week of banking turmoil, bailing out small tech. SVB was too cool for the state-owned school of lending. Europe's banks falter in wake of SBT's collapse. 3J's led banking world's rescue of First Republic, Janet Yellen, Jamie Dimon of JP Morgan Chase, and Jay Powell of the Federal Reserve. At a hearing this week at the Senate, Secretary of the Treasury Janet Yellen, former Federal Reserve Director or head of the Federal Reserve, was asked by Steve Langford some questions about, well, you bailed out Silicon Valley Bank. You're going to bail out my local community banks in Oklahoma? And this is about 5 or 6 minute clip, but I think it's, listen to how she says things and ask yourself, is she going to bail out somebody that's not like full of big donors to the Democratic Party?
Will the deposits in every community bank in Oklahoma, regardless of their size, be fully insured now? Are they fully recovered? Every bank, every community bank in Oklahoma, regardless of the size of the deposit, will they get the same treatment that SVBP just got or Signature Bank just got?
A bank only gets that treatment if a majority of the FDIC board, a supermajority of the Fed board, and I, in consultation with the president, determine that the failure to protect uninsured depositors would create systemic risk and significant economic and financial consequences.
So what is
And
your
we
plan?
made that determination.
Right. So
these
what is
two
your
banks.
plan to keep large depositors from moving their funds out of community banks into the big banks? We have seen the mergers of banks over the past decade. I'm concerned you're about to accelerate that by encouraging anyone who has a large deposit in a community bank to say, we're not going to make you whole, but if you go to one of our preferred banks, we will make you whole at that point.
Look, I mean, that's certainly not something that we're encouraging.
That is happening right now.
That is happening because depositors are concerned about the bank failures that have happened and whether or not other banks could also
No,
fail.
it's happening
And
because you're
it's-
fully insured no matter what the amount is if you're in a big bank. You're not fully insured if you're in a community bank.
Well, you're not fully insured. And
You
the big-
were at Signature, and it just barely met that threshold. You were at Signature.
Well, we felt that there was a serious risk of contagion that could have brought down and triggered runs on many banks. And that's something, given that our judgment is that the banking system overall is safe and sound, depositors should have confidence in the system, and we took these actions.
So there's a
to
special
discourage
assessment that's been done
contagion.
on community banks in my state and all banks across the country. Was there any discussion that that special assessment would only apply to the larger banks, or was it always assumed the special assessment would cover every bank, including rural banks in my state?
I think, I'm not certain what the rules are around that. That's for the FDIC to determine.
It has been reported publicly that SVB had a large number of Chinese investors that are there, including some that were companies directly connected to the Chinese Communist Party. Will those individuals, companies, entities, and investors that are Chinese investors be made whole based on assessments in my banks in Oklahoma? So what I'm asking is, will my banks in Oklahoma pay a special assessment to be able to make Chinese investors whole from Silicon Valley Bank?
Uninsured investors will be made whole in that bank, and I suppose that could include foreign depositors, but I don't believe there's any legal basis to discriminate among uninsured.
I get it, but I'm
depositors.
just saying that my community banks are going to pay this additional fee. It is always fascinating to me as well, the conversation that taxpayers are being made whole in this, that taxpayers are not going to have any kind of consequence on this. I'm sure my bankers are going to be very excited to know they no longer pay taxes, and their banks no longer pay taxes. Credit unions don't pay taxes, banks do, and so they're definitely taxpayers as well, and all banks make their revenue off of rates and fees and such to their account holders, which means every Oklahoman will pay higher fees in their community bank.
We're just going to have to move on.
If we have a collapse of the banking system and its economic consequences, that will have very severe effects on banks in Oklahoma that will also be threatened.
I'm just worried about the long-term
We are going to have to
consequences
move
on our banks
on,
as well.
or we're not going to get all senators in.
In other words, we got to move on. You're getting a little bit too close to the truth here, people. So here's Goldman loses $200 million. Hedge funds hit hard and fall out from collapse. Roller coaster ride for treasuries. Switzerland prepares emergency measures to deliver UBS takeover of Credit Suisse. This just came out from Financial Times last night. They've been in negotiations. Credit Suisse is a big investment bank out of Switzerland, been around for over 100 years. And it's not doing well. Its stock has fallen to like $8 billion. And I saw a report this morning that UBS had come in and said, okay, we will buy Credit Suisse. We'll pay $1 billion for it. And its market value right now is $8 billion. Because UBS is smart and they're saying, okay, if we're going to take the risk of this, we're going to do it like it's a fire sale, like Credit Suisse is burning down. So you can see there's the Credit Suisse building in Switzerland. Lender collapse. This is Financial Times. Put central banks' metal to the test. Things are tough. Now listen, I'm going to play a clip of Ed Dowd on the War Room with Steve Bannon from Friday. Ed is a former Goldman Sachs guy, great analyst. He's got a book out about the response to Charlie Vector and the excess deaths that we saw in the culture all over the world after that. It's excellent work. He's an analyst. He crunches the numbers. Here's what he had to say.
Ed Dowd, this was a called shot by you, brother, a couple of months ago on this show, and you actually said, hey, by the time we hit March, I think it's going to be game over. Walk us through what you knew then, why you projected out, and you actually think now it's worse than you actually thought it was, correct, sir?
Correct. So in November, I came on your show. My team, Carlos and Yuri, the PhD physicist, did a report on the economy, and the economy showed a deep, deep recession coming fast and furious in first and second quarter. So here we are. The other bad thing that happened in November of 2022, M2, the money supply, year-over-year growth went negative for the first time since 1930. Let me say that again, 1930. This is the fifth time it's happened, and the previous 4 times since 1868 have been associated with financial panics. So M2 is just basically money, and money is credit. So credit's contracting, and here we are, and the Wall Street Journal, I guess, is fomenting bank runs by reporting that 186 of them are in trouble. So here we are. And I don't know the speed of this. I don't know whether they're going to be able to slow this down or what's going to happen.
Well, actually, hold it. What the Wall Street Journal just said, though, I want to make sure it's clear. They said, hey, it's not going to be a bank run because the Federal Reserve, they've now given an implicit guarantee to all these banks. That quite frankly, the issue is that they've guaranteed these deposits. So where does that is going to be the most expensive? We're going to see the most expensive bailout in history because these banks are insolvent. The Silicon Valley Bank balance, when you get in to see the numbers, it was insolvent last year. It's got leverage of 185 to 1. A bank should have leverage of 3 or 4, maybe 5 to 1. In the investment banks, 8 to 1. Remember, in the financial meltdown in 2008, they were all over Bear Stearns and Lehman and Goldman Sachs. They had 20 to 25 to 1 leverage. The Silicon Valley Bank was basically a country club with a hedge fund attached to it. It wasn't a commercial bank, and they allowed that to happen. There's dozens of situations out there, and they say 186 banks are in that situation. How do you not have a financial meltdown when the guarantor is the American wage earner, sir?
So what they're going to do is they're going to try to put their finger in the dike, and they're going to guarantee all the deposits, end up nationalizing the banks effectively, like you've been saying, and consolidate, and then there'll be suitors for these banks, probably the 6 systemically important banks. So we're going to consolidate the banks into 6 banks. And whether or not this was a plan or not, that's what's going to happen. And if you think that's going to stop what's coming, it won't. It'll probably delay it. But by the end of this, financial assets will be a lot lower. There will be a global sovereign debt default somewhere. We're watching Japan. We're worried about Japan. We're worried about what's going on in China. So this is going to spread around the globe. And quite frankly, this is beyond everyone's control, including the Fed and the U.S. Treasury.
By the way, just to make sure that Ed Dowd is speaking the truth, they're supposed to be the best bankers in the world. The platinum, the premier guys are in Switzerland. You know that? As we speak right now, they're trying to jam their 2 biggest banks, Credit Suisse and UBS, Union Bank of Switzerland. They're trying to cram those together. The Swiss National Bank, which is their Federal Reserve, their central bank, is trying to cram those together over the weekend so they can open on Monday and have a quote unquote national champion, essentially nationalize their banking system. That is going on in Switzerland as we speak, as the Federal Reserve with the discount window is opening up and making sure that I think it was $186 billion they shoveled into these insolvent banks. When banks said they needed for liquidity, that means they're insolvent, okay? And you saw in Silicon Valley Bank with the lies and misrepresentations of the financial position of the bank and the clown show they had as a board of directors. Ed, when you say it's going to get even worse, what do you mean with that? Credit contraction, they've just printed too much. You have $300 trillion of debt. Rubini's right. There's no way this can be paid off. So you're going to start seeing sovereign debt crises. You're going to see a Japan or a real big country just say, I can't pay for this anymore. Like, by the way, remember, the United States is the same thing. This is this debt ceiling issue. Unless the Fed keeps printing money, unless we keep monetizing the debt, there's no way that we can pay this off. It's impossible. Ed Dowd.
Yeah, so, the release valve for all this debt is going to be a currency issue and a global sovereign debt default. So currency wars are coming. There'll be debasing of currencies, which will lead to kinetic war. I mean, look, I don't want to be a doomsayer, but this is beyond everyone's control. We're at the end, and it's imploding on itself. It just once money supply grows year-over-year goes negative, it's over.
This is like the Great Depression. After the high of the 20s and World War I, in the late 20s, early 30s, it collapsed. They tried everything they could possibly try, and by 1937 to 38, even the United States, they were out of the tools at the time, and it led into a global conflict. You think this is like the late 30s? This is the end of the world order that came up. The neoliberal, neocon world order is collapsing in front of us. You believe that, and it's going to have to crash, and we rebuild some system, a new system out of the ashes of the old.
Yeah, it won't be reported. You won't see it on TV, but it's going to happen slowly over time. And we're looking at the end of globalization. Obviously, peak globalization was a while ago, and now we're going to go to decentralization. That's just the nature of how these things work. We're going to have to figure out a way to get together as a country and come out on top of this, because there's going to be kinetic wars. I don't see any way around it. I don't want to, and will there be war this year? I don't know, next year maybe, but it's coming unless we fix this problem. And we need to get some adults.
Well, there's a kinetic war right now in Ukraine that's approximately, we're financing that. If we cut off the money, the war would end tomorrow. We're fighting it. We're going to fight the war in Ukraine against Russia and China now until every Ukrainian's dead, right?
So here's, this happened in Ukraine. This was a U.S. drone. This is a camera from a U.S. drone. And a Russian jet kind of came after the drone. It's about a $30 million drone. And here's what happened when the Russian jet came after it. You can see the jet coming. What the jet wanted to do was to dump some fuel on its engine, and he just miscalculated a bit. He kind of hit the propeller, and the $30 million drone went down, and Russia went out and salvaged it as far as we know. So that's, that was in international waters, so now there's a big argument. Was Russia wrong or right for that? I just don't see us doing anything about it. That's, remember, even during the Trump administration, Iran shot down a $230 million drone in the Persian Gulf. And what happened? Now, as far as I know, nothing happened. Maybe they adjusted the sanctions a bit, but there was no attack on Iran, even by the Trump administration. Because why? What happens if they attack? Well, there's world war in this crisis. And I hate to say this. This is, we can, okay, Zuckerberg is laying off a bunch of people at Meta, Facebook, it's up to about 30,000 people now. And everybody's cutting staff, Google, Microsoft, everybody. In France, the Macron government, I should have got my Macron graphic. I remember that graphic from the The Economist a few years ago, where Macron was walking on water. And then I kind of photoshopped it, Macron in a Napoleon outfit, with his hand in here and sort of slowly sinking down into the water. Well, now he's just sort of at eye level, maybe. Pretty soon you'll just see the hat floating, the the pointy Napoleon hat floating on top of the water. I didn't have time to trot that out this morning. Because what did he do? They put in a thing, they didn't even pass it through the parliament. They just said, hey, we're raising the retirement age by 2 years. And they're having demonstrations and everything in the street. People are upset. And the word this morning was, it may be that the Macron government's going to fail. So, so much for the view that he was the Antichrist. And maybe he comes back. I don't know. I'm not putting anybody on the world stage today. I'm not putting behind it. This was ICC issued a war crime warrant for Putin. Part of that is over. I talked about, the children from Ukraine that have been taken to Russia. Russia has a major demographic problem. Russia used to be the 9th most populous country on the planet. It's now on track to soon be 22nd because they're not having babies. And they're taking kids from Ukraine. There was a story in the, listen, I know as soon as I say this, I say, oh, you're pro-Ukrainian. Listen, I'm pro-truth, okay? And I talk to people in Ukraine, and they say this is happening. So what did the doctors do in a place where the Russian troops, I think it was in Kherson, the Russian troops are coming in. They had a bunch of babies in the hospital. So what did the Ukrainians do? They made up, the story is, they made up medical records and problems for the babies, saying they needed to be on respiratory equipment all the time. And the Russians let them alone, and they were able to get the kids out of there. These were babies. So listen, you can be pro-Putin. I don't really care. I'm just telling you, I'm pro-truth. And there's bad things going on both sides of this deal. And it's time people started talking about it. Because I hear people get on, they never mention anything, oh, Russia's great. They're chess players. They're the most humanitarian. I said this one guy, most humanitarian army in the history of mankind. He said this. I watched the video. Somebody sent it to me. And I told him, I said, listen, you can listen to that, okay? But, I sort of have a brain. And I know a little bit about this guy. So look, I think Russia's going to win this thing. That's pretty clear, I think. A lot of people are dying. Nobody ever seems to talk about that. Oh, well, it's okay. Russia's going to be an important power in Bible prophecy. Maybe, maybe not. I kind of think it is, but that doesn't make it right. Where's your humanity, people? That's my point, okay? And I get a little bit exercised about this at times. But this isn't going to do anything. Do you think Putin needed to take an extra melatonin to get to sleep last night because the ICC issued a warrant for his arrest? No. You all are going to be taking, you want a whole bottle of the melatonin, you can get it at your local pharmacy or health food store. Y'all going to be taking handfuls of that stuff to get to sleep after you're done with this update. So So we've got this problem in Israel. Like, here's the protests that are going on in Israel. Hundreds of thousands of people in the streets. Crime minister, never surrender. You got the fist and everything. People are upset with the judicial reform proposed by the Netanyahu coalition. Initially, Herzog, the president, came out, and that's kind of a ceremonial office, and he said, well, we need to be kind of let's all get along and everything, and we need to compromise and talk. And then he came out and he sort of backtracked on it and said, this thing is a nightmare, and now he's changed. And Gadi Taub, who used to be a man of the left, wrote for Haaretz, got fired by Haaretz a few months ago. He said, I think that Herzog did this because he's still a relatively young guy, and he figures his political future is staked to compromising his principles. And in the Haaretz comments, you can go read them. They're threatening to murder Gadi Taub. He used to do a show with Caroline Glick, and it's totally out of control. Even Melanie Phillips says we need electoral reform, not judicial reform. Times of London, Can Israel survive? And they're talking about civil war. This is Herzog. Judicial reforms are a nightmare. Here's Gowdy Taub's Twitter. So what happened to the president? Why did he turn over? Because he really tried to get a compromise. Then he found out that there is and will not be a compromise because Esther Hayut, that's the head of the Israeli Supreme Court, is not ready to move even a millimeter. Then he recalculated his course, telling himself that at least he would restore his position on the left because he is a young man and has a whole career ahead of him. It's not complicated. So listen, and I have friends on both sides of this issue. Here's one of the people who came out this week, an article a week ago or so in The Guardian saying, hey, I don't like this thing that's going on. This is Yuval Noah Harari. Plans for the Israeli judicial system are an anti-democratic coup and will be resisted. And he goes on in there and he says, I won't support Netanyahu because he's a dictator. And so you see this ridiculous, he's not a dictator, okay? And look, people don't like the Zionist right-wing parties. They don't like the laws that they might enact. This sometimes happens in countries that have a democratic format. One party gets power. And we'll say the Lord doesn't come for a while. The demographics for the Israeli left don't work very well because the right-wing Zionist parties are having a lot of babies. If you've ever been in an Orthodox neighborhood in Jerusalem, you know exactly what I'm talking about. There are babies and baby carriages all over the place. It's shocking. I was personally shocked when I saw it. Not in a bad way. It's just like, I haven't seen that before. That's the way I was sort of shocked. So they're having all this. Lapid did come out and say, well, we need a constitution now. And a lot of people agree with that. Now, here's a video I'm going to play, and I know people are going to say, oh, that's by some right-wing group. But listen, I did go to law school, practiced law for a long time, and I kind of understand what's going on. And I think this video sort of gives the right-wing perspective on why you need judicial reform in Israel. Here's this video. Whoops. Here we go. Whoops. For some reason, there we go.
Israel's elected government has been advancing certain reforms. The main goal of the reforms is to restore checks and balances between the legislative, executive, and judicial branches. These reforms were among its main election promises and enjoy solid public support. Over the last 2 decades, the judicial branch has annexed powers in a way that cannot be found in any other democracy in the world. For example, sitting Supreme Court justices have an effective veto over the appointment of new justices. The court can use vague claims of unreasonableness to overturn any government policy or to disqualify inconvenient civil service appointments that are out of its jurisdiction. The court declared Israel's basic laws to be its constitution and uses them to annul ordinary statutes. But now it has taken to itself the authority to rule parts of this very constitution unconstitutional. The court decided, with no basis in law, that any ruling of the Attorney General is binding on the government. That means that an appointed civil servant is now the boss of the elected Prime Minister. Could you imagine any of these things happening in the United States or any other democratic country? Some of the court's rulings have done severe long-term social and economic harm. For example, the court suspended signed government contracts for offshore natural gas drilling, undermining its ability to do business. The court overruled hard-won compromises regarding Haredi army enlistment that sent Israel into an endless series of elections. Prominent Israeli former Supreme Court judges have strongly criticized the current judiciary's abuse of power, and so have eminent judicial scholars from around the world. Professor Richard Posner called Israeli Chief Justice Aaron Barak an enlightened despot and a legal pirate. The reforms in progress will address the anomalies of the Israeli system and bring Israel just a few steps closer to the rest of the Western democracies.
Okay, so I like the graphics and everything. So look, they've got a problem, and some of the legislation to me seems to be overreaching as to how they can overturn a Supreme Court decision and everything. But what happens is I think they have a committee of 9 people that select Supreme Court justices. And what they've been able to do is they've been able to get left-wing justices onto the 3 that come from the judicial branch, and then the other 6 come from other places, but you need a supermajority. So the 3 judges always vote each way, the same way. I think you need 7. So they vote as a block all the time, and they'll only vote for a left-wing person because you need 7, that's 3. So the most anybody else can get is 6, and they say, hey, you want to get somebody appointed, it'll be, and so it becomes a lot of nepotism and that type of thing. And I think it needs to be reformed. They've made some bad decisions. Okay, but people are concerned. They don't agree with the right-wing parties. They don't like them. And it's a pretty serious situation. I mean, they're talking, there's a lot of talk about civil war. I don't know if it'll come to that or not. So I have a bunch more, but I'm going to, on the Saudi-Iran thing. So I'll save that. So that's not going anywhere anytime soon. But this is, we've got these, so by the way, Avi Abloh, who I had met in Menorah Square in Jerusalem when I was there a few months ago, good guy, social media guy, Zionist, conservative, you know, the kind of guy that I like. And you may not, but he did a podcast this past week on Pulse of Israel. You can find it. It's pretty good about the right-wing perspective on this judicial reform thing. So, and then when you find that, go find somebody from the left and listen to them and make your own decision about it. We've got this thing, but this is coming at a time when Iran, you know, is in league with Saudi Arabia. Israel thinks we got to do something about the Iranian nuclear program, but how do we get there? Because we can't go across Syria or Iraq. We can't go across Jordan. We thought we might be able to go across Saudi Arabia, but now they're in starting a diplomatic relationship with Iran. Well, maybe we can go up around the north part of Syria through Turkey, because Turkey's in turmoil right now, and Erdogan's like 10 points down for re-election in mid-May. But so watch for something to happen there. There's something that'll happen, like a coup, attempted coup or something. But the parties are pretty much aligned against him. They had that earthquake. People aren't happy with the response to that. I think he actually came out and apologized this week for that. Very unusual. So people say, well, they'll go from bases in Azerbaijan, but the Azerbaijan ambassador came out and said, no, Israel, you're not going to use our bases here to attack Iran. Why? Well, because Iran's right next door. Look at where Azerbaijan is. So it's a big problem. And are they going to do it alone? Amir Avivi was on Caroline Glick a week ago. Retired Brigadier General Amir Avivi with Caroline Glick, I think on March 7th. You can get that. I'll play part of that in a midweek update. I've had it teed up here for a few weeks now, but it just seems like there's a lot of things intruding on my prophecy update space. And because I think it's really good. And he said that what might come out of this, about 50 minutes in, he goes, you know what might come out of this? This might, he's a very optimistic guy. I know him and I spent some time with him, and he's like, you know, there could be a peace agreement come out of this. Now that ought to sort of perk up our ears. You know, when the trilaterals are saying this is the first year of the New World Order and talking about peace agreement, if that's the way this thing is going to work out, we'll see. I'm just saying there's a lot of balls in the air. But here's this, this is from the New York Post. Trump tweeted yesterday that on Truth Social, that his arrest in New York on charges is imminent. He expects to be arrested on Tuesday, and he said people need to protest. And now immediately everybody that, you know, the narrative that came about from the election protest, and there were things that people did wrong, okay, but now we're seeing all the videos, and I'm just saying is that there's a lot of things to talk about here, and I don't know how the Manhattan prosecutor gets him on a federal election violation. That's just not possible. It's just not the way the system works. I don't understand it. People are upset that Trump said people should come out and protest. And so the narrative is building now. The same narrative again. And the Justice Department came out this week and said, we've arrested 1,000 people on charges from early 2021. We're halfway in whom we're going to arrest. People are still being held without bail in jail. And so now there's a question, well, is Trump going to be held without bail? Because, well, he said people should protest, you know, and he's a threat. So he may be denied bail. So in New York, you can push somebody in front of a subway train and you get out on your own recognizance. This, look, the turmoil we're seeing in Israel, the turmoil we're seeing in France, the turmoil we're seeing in countries south of the equator from the United States, south of the United States, the turmoil we're seeing in the UK, it's everywhere. And don't you dare use non-inclusive language when you talk about this stuff. The pastor in Calgary, well, I'll be in 2 months, less than 2 months, arrested again this week. Pastor Reimer. Here's a Wall Street Journal report this morning. Trump's comments about possible arrest reignite political fight. So it could be an interesting week. So I have plans for what I'm going to talk about in a midweek update this week, but guess what? Things change. And the shelf life of stories is incredible. So, and this is from the Atlantic. This, I think, is a pretty good article. The New Anarchy. And they're like, this is coming from both sides. So it's a left-wing publication, but they sometimes have really good analysis. And here's a quote from that. We face a new phase of domestic terror, one characterized by radicalized individuals with shape-shifting ideologies willing to kill their political enemies. And we're seeing this all over the place. And what's going to happen? Somebody's going to come in and say, hey, listen, I got a plan. Central bank digital currencies. We got this system we're going to put in place. Everybody's going to get along. Everybody will be happy. Do you think the world is set up more for this than almost any time in the last 2,000 years? I think it is. So tomorrow I'll be doing 5 o'clock, 4:45, 5 o'clock with Tom Hughes on Hope for Our Times. Either on he has an app, but sometimes it's on YouTube, sometimes it's on the app, sometimes it's on both. So check the Hope for Our Times app, hopeforourtimes.com, and then YouTube also, and we'll see where it is. So crazy world, right? So, get your melatonin so you can get some sleep at night. And look, the Lord's in control. We need to share the gospel with people as much as possible, because people need to know, the full-orbed gospel that Jesus came to earth, lived a perfect life, died for our sins, rose again on the third day, ascended to heaven, and is coming back to rule and reign from Jerusalem. That's the whole thing. And we need to share that with people because it looks like it's getting closer. So let's pray. Lord, thank you so much for this day. We pray that you'll bless us this week, give us opportunities to share the gospel with people. Always help us to remember that to follow the admonition of Paul to stand firm in the faith and to act like men. And bless us this week in Jesus' name. Amen.